I'm here to give you an overview of kind of my favorite, well, kind of. I had to make notes. I've started to make notes because I don't want to make any mistakes. Hey everyone, welcome back. If you're new to my channel, I'm Jess. Nice to meet you. Welcome. Here's some of the books that I loved this year. How's it going? That good, you say? Yeah, it's going well here. We're deep into the January winter in Montreal. It's cold today. I went outside today to walk the dog and I felt the tears on my eyelashes freeze. And I remember the first time I came to Montreal, I had that same experience and it kind of shocked me. I'm not going to pretend. It shocked me a little. It was so cold. Last year my pipes froze. Actually every year my pipes have frozen. So this year last year I spent some time just doing some work on my house to make sure that didn't happen again this year. But anyway, enough about me. Let's talk books. I'm here to give you my top 10. That is so difficult to do. Holy moly, how do people choose top 10 books? Very, very challenging to choose 10 books. So in fact, I didn't. Surprise, surprise. And I apologize today if I seem a little strange. I wrenched my neck. Oh, and it's so sore. So I can't really, you know that thing where you can't really turn your head. I'm having a little trouble turning my head to the left. So if I look a little weird, that's the explanation. I'm here to give you an overview of my favorite reads from 2010. And I realized when I was going back over the list of books that I've read over the past year that I read a lot of classics. Because this was a return to reading for me this year, I did read a lot of classics. So I'm going to leave the classics out of this best of, and I'm going to film a video this month about the classics that I read this year because quite frankly, the classics that I read this year are like my favorite reads. But then I also had some really great reads of contemporary fiction. So kind of improvising a little bit. So you can look forward to that. Best classics of 2021 that I read. And I'm going to be reading classics again this year. So I think we have to leave classics in their own category because they're classics for a reason. No, not that everybody loves every classic they read, but they did stand the test of time, didn't they? Okay. So without further ado, I'll go through the 10 books that really made a big impression on me this past year in 2021. I'm going to go through the books in order based on when I read them. So the first book that I read this year, so not in any order of preference, these are just books that I really loved this year. And it includes 9 fiction books and actually 1 nonfiction book. So I do read a mix of nonfiction and fiction. So this is the first book that I read that is on my top 10 or best of list for 2021. The book is called Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead by Olga Tokarczuk. Olga Tokarczuk is a Nobel Prize winning author. This was given to me as a Christmas gift last year, and so I was introduced to her work last year, and I have another novel of hers called Flights, which I may try to get to this year. I'd like to read more of her work. This book was very, like, obviously I really liked it because it's in my top 10, but just to say, so this book was a little bit different than anything I've ever read. It had a mystical fable, fairy tale feeling to it. The protagonist in the story is an older woman by the name of Janina, and the setting is a small village in the wilderness. This woman, Janina, is a little bit of an oddball. She's very eccentric, and she's very into astrology, and she spends a lot of time alone, although it is a small town, so there's a community and there are people within the community and everybody knows one another. And essentially this is a murder mystery, but it's also really dreamlike in the quality of the writing. Anyway, so to get to the story, to the plot, her neighbor who goes by the name of the neighbor is Bigfoot, is found dead. So then she kind of implements herself in this investigation as more people start turning up dead. Like numerous bodies are piling up in the story, and she's kind of at the center of it. So it's a really interesting look at, like, there's a philosophical question being raised by the story having to do with animals. So animals play a really big role in the story. The philosophical question that's being posed is, you know, why are humans being valued above all other creatures? So that's all I'm going to say about it. I loved this book so much because I thought it was so unusual. I thought the main character was such an oddball character. So I really liked the main character. And it still had a really good plot with a kind of a philosophical message. And I just really enjoyed how mystical it was and how unusual it was, how unusual the writing was. I really enjoyed this book. I couldn't put it down, but I even knew what was happening. Like I knew the whodunit part of the story, but I still wanted to see how it was going to be presented. So it was really an interesting read, a really good read. So that was my first favorite of the year. I'm definitely planning to read some more Olga Tokarczuk this year. So again, in order of appearance, the second book that I really loved this year was, this is the only nonfiction book on my list, was Michelle MacNamara's I'll Be Gone in the Dark. The sad thing about this book is that Michelle MacNamara really sadly passed away in the middle of writing this book. And that's so unusual, obviously, and sad. Michelle MacNamara became like a bit of an armchair detective while she was writing this story. She basically brought this case to the surface, to the light. It was buried. People were not, it was a cold case that wasn't being investigated, hadn't been solved. And she just dug and dug and dug and dug and dug into it. And I think, well, let me just tell you the story. So Michelle MacNamara dubbed this serial killer the Golden State Killer. He was a very violent predator who committed like over 50 sexual assaults in Northern California before moving on to the south of the state, where he committed a series of pretty sadistic murders. She really was investigating this case, and in the end they did find who the perpetrator was through her work and the work of other armchair internet sleuths. And it's one of those internet sleuths who finished the story for her, but it's very, like, you can notice exactly where she stops writing and where the other writer finishes off, because her writing is so unique and it's very intimate. It's a really engaging style, and she brings a lot of her personal, it's almost autobiographical in a certain way, because she brings a lot of her personal experience from the time she was young and someone was murdered in her neighborhood into the story. So it's a very kind of personal look, and she herself got so engrossed and involved in the finding of this killer that you could tell that it was very personal for her too, from the way that she wrote it. So this is just an unusual, you don't find this kind of thing very often. It's very special. So I wanted to highlight it as one of my favorites of the year. I like true crime, and I discovered the book through watching the HBO documentary. It's definitely one of my favorite books of the year. It's so sad that she passed away during the writing of the book. I just think it's so sad, but the fact that she helped to uncover this killer, and I really think that it's sort of her life's masterpiece. So I think it deserves some attention. The Echo Wife by Sarah Gailey. This book was so good. Of course it was great. It's on my top 10. This is the story about a woman named Evelyn Caldwell, who is a scientist, and all of her research is in the realm of cloning. And the story is about her and another character named Martine, who is her clone, a clone of her named Martine that she did not know existed. It turns out her husband, Nathan, cloned her using her own methods and using her research. Nathan is killed by Martine, Evelyn's clone, and Martine shows up on Evelyn's doorstep asking for help to manage the situation. Martine is a clone of Evelyn in every way except in her demeanor and personality. So she looks the same, but she behaves very differently. She's a lot more accommodating. She's a lot more dependent. She is really the opposite of Evelyn, and that is why Nathan made her, because he wanted somebody who was more submissive. Then the story unfolds from there. So there's a lot more to the story, but I'm going to leave it at that. And the reason that I really love this story, I mean, the science might be questionable, but it brings up a lot of ethical questions about cloning. And the character Martine is a character that Evelyn herself comes to feel for. And she questions that because it is a clone, or we're encouraged to question that because this is a clone. So at what point is a clone a human? I guess if it's a human clone, then it's a human, right? So it's really creepy. And I don't know, I don't read a lot of sci-fi novels, but this was definitely like the best science fiction book I think I've ever read. Like I said, I don't read very many, but I found that it was very realistic as well. So it's another one of those novels that kind of runs across different genres. Highly recommend, even if you're not super into sci-fi. This book was very smart, had a lot of, well, not so much a lot of plot twists, but it's definitely engaging, and you're wondering the whole time how they're going to get themselves out of this mess. Unsettled Ground really blew me away. I had not read any Claire Fuller, and I fully intend to read some more of Claire Fuller's work. It's the story of Jeannie and Julius, who are older and were very dependent on their mother, Dot. At the opening of the book, their mother is found dead. And mostly the story focuses on the story of Jeannie and how Jeannie struggles to survive and to live an independent life after having lived most of her life up until the age, I think she's 51 in the book, up until the age of 51, of being completely dependent. Now their mother Dot leaves the cottage to them, but traditionally they are a poor family living in the countryside, and neither of the children, and particularly Jeannie, have really ever held jobs or worked, despite the fact that they probably would have been capable of doing something like that, and both have, and Jeannie especially is a very talented musician. The story reveals a series of secrets that were kept from the children that really kept them dependent. And I don't know, this book just really moved me, and Jeannie's character and her struggle for survival was so heart-wrenching and so sweet. I don't know, sweet's not necessarily the right word. I just found that this book made me feel a lot of things, and it made me think about a lot of things about a certain type of dependence and a certain type of poverty. I was really touched by Jeannie's struggle for survival. The writing was impeccable. So yeah, the story of actually a talented and capable person who's trying to find her way in the world after having been sheltered and trying to drag herself out of poverty, and just the strain of that. Claire Fuller, man. Unsettled Ground. I don't know. I haven't read Prentice, but I kind of wish Claire Fuller's book had won the Women's Prize. I shouldn't say that because I haven't read all of the books that were nominated. Next on my list is Leave the World Behind by Rumaan Alam. This book was crazy. Whoa, this was a crazy work of literary fiction. Again, it's very difficult to put these books into categories like mystery, thriller, horror because the themes that they're dealing with across a lot of those genre boundaries. I think if we had to put all of these books that I'm talking about today into one category, excluding Michelle MacNamara's book, I would put them in the genre of literary fiction. So this is the story of Amanda and Clay, a white couple. And the reason I say white is because there are themes of race and class explored in this novel. So Amanda and Clay are a white couple who are escaping New York City in the summertime. They've rented an Airbnb on Long Island, and you know, they're having a summer vacation or some time away from the city. It's very indulgent. At the beginning of the story already, the setup is that, you know, these are wealthy people, and I think she spends like $300 on groceries, on all kinds of indulgences. And, you know, she's sort of bored, and, you know, the typical kind of white, upper middle class lifestyle. One night they get a knock at the door, and Ruth and GH are at the door. They're a black couple, and they're saying like, this is our house and we had nowhere else to go. We've escaped the city. It's chaos. There's no television, there's no internet, and we don't really know what's happening. So there you have like the setup for this story about what transpires. It subtly explores racism, and it also is really scary. It's really got that claustrophobic feeling of being, you know, they're out in the middle of nowhere. They don't have any connection to what's actually happening. We never know what's actually going on. Weird things begin to happen, and it's like super scary. This isolated setting really amps up the desperation, the feeling of desperation and anxiety that's built up in the story. Yeah, it was gripping. It was a really excellent read. I really thoroughly enjoyed it, and I highly recommend it. One of my best books of the year. Halfway through my list. My question for you is, what were your favorite books that you read this year? Have you read any of the books that I'm talking about? Please make a note in the comments below if there's anything you want to agree with or even disagree with. I'm totally fine with that. I love hearing different people's opinions and would love to hear what you think. So, I don't know, like this was such a huge discovery for me this year, and I made a whole vlog about it, which you can check out. Bunny by Mona Awad. I discovered Mona Awad this year because I just came across 13 Ways of Looking at a Fat Girl in a secondhand bookstore and thought that I'd heard of it, picked it up, read it, loved it. I moved on to Bunny, which was just fantastic. Such an amazingly fun story, and it's just so well written. I could go on and on and on about how good of a writer Mona Awad is. I haven't read All's Well yet, but I'm hoping to get to it. But I've heard it's not quite as good. And Bunny, of course, it's that kind of, I don't know, it doesn't get tired. That theme, well, at least it doesn't get tired for me. It might get tired for some other people, but that theme of cliques in schools, in society, of these women who are just so, they're just so, right? This follows the story of Samantha, who is in a graduate writing program somewhere in, you know, an upper class Ivy League New England school. And it's about her relationship to a clique of women who she refers to as the bunnies. And it really is about her desire to fit in with this group, but also the absurdity of the group and also the absurdity of academia. And she has a best friend, Ava, who she abandons to try to be part of this group. Very a la Mean Girls. I don't know, why did I love it? I loved it because it had a lot of underlying subtext about mental health. It had a lot of underlying subtext about society, obviously, fitting in and all of those themes, and about the snobbery of academia and literature. And it had all these ingredients, and plus it was quite fantastical. So that as well, like you're questioning the whole time, like, is this woman, is she on drugs? Is this a dream? What is this story really about? But I'd invite you to go and check out my vlog if you want to hear more about what I have to say about this book. But I highly recommend. If you haven't read Bunny yet, you're missing out. So the next book I'm going to talk about, I don't have a physical copy of because I had taken it out of the library. I really enjoyed Infinite Country by Patricia Engel. It's not a light read by any means. The themes that are covered are upsetting. So the themes that I would give trigger warnings for in Infinite Country are sexual assaults, alcoholism, and that kind of abuse. So it's the story of Talia, the third child of Colombian immigrants to America, although when the story opens, Talia is in Colombia, and she's just escaped from like a detention center where she was serving time for committing a crime, and she's escaping to America. So Infinite Country is really the story of immigration, migration from your home country to the country where dreams are made, you know, the almighty US of A. And it just deals with the heartbreak that comes from leaving your homeland, from a family being separated because of immigration, and the idea that if you immigrate and you pursue this dream and the dream is not a dream, you end up in the country as an immigrant, as an illegal immigrant, living in fear of deportation, living in fear of being found out and being mistreated. So that brings up the question of, why do people immigrate, and what are they immigrating to? What are they leaving behind, and what are they going towards? And is it worth it, I guess? I mean, there's so much to say about this book, Infinite Country. I loved it because of there was a lot of mythology woven into the storytelling of Colombian myths, and I thought that that was very beautiful. It really presents the paradox of being displaced and displaced peoples, and what it means to have to flee your home, to a home that's not your home. It was wonderful. Heartbreakingly wonderful. Beautiful book. Detransition Baby, one of my favorite reads of the year, by Torrey Peters. Detransition Baby tells the story of Reese, Ames, and Katrina, a group of 3 women or men transitioning from, well, let me explain. So Ames is a man who detransitioned from being a woman, and he finds himself in a relationship with his boss, Katrina, and Katrina becomes pregnant. His ex, Reese, who is trans and who's always wanted to be a mother, becomes a part of the story when Ames approaches her to participate in parenting Katrina's and his baby. And then the story kind of unravels from there. How will they make this work? What I loved about this book, in addition to the fact that it's extremely witty, some people have said like it's very indulgent in terms of the descriptions and the way the book is written, but I really appreciated how much Torrey Peters really got into the meat and the thick of a lot of the issues facing what it means to be a mother, what your experience is like when you're trans, what are the issues within the trans community. There's just so much in here that I learned through reading that I was able to have, obviously not a personal experience of, but an intimate idea of, that I will never experience. And I think that that is so, so important, because now I have so much of a better understanding of lives lived that are different from mine. And so I really appreciate this book. This was also nominated for the Women's Prize. And despite my love of Claire Fuller, I would have been really happy to have seen this one win as well. I really enjoyed this book. I think everybody should read it. Severance by Ling Ma. Whew, baby. Severance by Ling Ma. Honestly, like, this story is a debut novel, and is it ever a great work for a debut novel. It is a story that is written about a pandemic in 2018 that is so eerily accurate in describing our current pandemic, although it's a little bit more end of world or dystopian than what we're experiencing right now. But written in 2018. It's a story of what happens when the world shuts down because of a fever. In this book, it's a fever that people get and they kind of lose their minds and they get very fevered and then I don't think they die right away. Like it has a very Walking Dead feel to it. It follows the story of our main character, Candace, who was living and working in New York before the fever outbreak. And it just tells the story about before the outbreak and then post-outbreak. And post-outbreak, she's joined kind of a cult-like group of people who are trying to survive by banding together. Yeah, that's really what the story is about. And it's just a really great book. It was a really good read. And if you can stomach the topic of reading about pandemic or reading about something really dystopian like that, or a dystopian version of something like that, then I think you would really enjoy this book. It was very cathartic to read this over the past year. And I just really liked it because I really liked the character Candace and I liked her voice, and she was quite an independent character. And in the end, it's really just about how she has to make peace with losing so much. She loses a lot over the course of the plague and the pandemic. And it's just about her experience of that. So it was really good. I really enjoyed it. Finally, the last book I'm going to talk about is another one that I don't own that I took out of the library. How Beautiful We Were by Imbolo Mbue. It's the story of an American oil company and the damage the company has caused in an African village. In this village, the children are dying as a result of the drilling that's been happening, and the story is told from the perspective of, so it's written in chapters from the perspective of different characters in the village and different characters in the story, and it's multi-generational, talks about the way that the community and the way that the people within the community respond to what's happening to them. And it's just a very rich, very beautifully told story about really important current concerns. The fictional village depicted in the story is called Kasawa, which is in Africa, and the villagers there have a simple life, living off the land as farmers. And this company, this American oil company called Pexton, convinced them to allow them to start drilling through manipulation. The children start dying as a result of this drilling. And then the land becomes infertile and barren, and the waters become polluted, and basically the community cannot survive anymore. The village leaders and their corruption, the corruption of the American oil company Pexton, and then also the story of the people in the village or from the village who also rebel or try to rebel against what's happening and take revenge on this company, including one of the characters who goes across to North America and discovers that similar things are happening all across the world in America as well, despite the fact that she thought that was only happening in her village. There's just so many themes that are covered in the story, but it's also, the characters are very carefully created and they're very beautiful characters, not to use the word in the title, but very convincing story. One of the main characters, Tula, is a child of the village, a young person who becomes an activist. It's about her journey in a sense. That also was really special. So yeah, she uses the individual voices like the voice of Tula, and the collective voices of the children are depicted. It's just a really well crafted story that is very powerful, that deals with themes that are very important. So, the people of Kasawa are dramatically affected, as we all are, by the behavior of big companies, big corporations who don't care for the people, don't care for the land, don't care for anybody's well-being. I listened to the audiobook as well. It was narrated by a series of different actors. I'll list them all in the description box below. And they all did a really wonderful job of depicting the different voices and the different characters within the novel. It's a very sad story about a very sad situation, so you have to be prepared for that. And it really shows what happens when we live in a world that's controlled by greed. And the people in the village are so powerless. They go from manipulation and like political manipulation within the village and within the structure of the decision making within the village to outright rebellion as ways to respond to what's happening to them. And it's really interesting to read and to think about what are the options open to people who are powerless in the face of these large corporations, and what can we collectively do in the face of these large corporations. It brings up a lot of really important questions about how to handle late capitalism and the raping of the earth. Okay, on that happy note, I really do recommend this book, and that's it. Those are my 10 best ofs. 10 best of the year. I had a fantastic reading year. I probably could have added several other books to this list, but I held back. I tried to keep it short. Thank you all for watching. I hope you have a fantastic week. If you're somewhere where it's winter, stay warm. If you're somewhere where it's summer, enjoy the sunshine. Get outside, get some fresh air, and I will see you in the next one. I'm going to be filming a video about my favorite classics from last year, so stay tuned for that. Bye for now. Congratulations to Torrey Peters on such a great work of fiction. Me congratulating Torrey Peters. Who the hell do I think I am? Ah, hilarious. Is that hilarious or is it pathetic? Okay, I really have to go to the bathroom, but I'll hold it.